Hi, I'm Phil, and this is episode 3 of Phil's Gaming Memories. This time, we're going to look at something a little bit different. It's Landmaker on the PlayStation. The two main game modes are Puzzle Mode and Arcade Mode. We're going to look at both in this video, but first, we'll have a look at Arcade Mode. I'm showing you Arcade Mode first because Landmaker was originally an arcade game, and this mode is the straight port of that version. Puzzle Mode is something completely different. It uses the same basic mechanics, but presents them in a very different way. It's essentially a completely separate game, so we're going to look at that later. Now before I share my history with this game with you, I'll give you a quick rundown of how Landmaker works, just so you can know what you're looking at while I'm waffling on. Landmaker is quite a simple game, really. You have to fire light-coloured blocks at one another to make houses of various sizes, then knock them down to send loads of junk blocks over to the other player's side of the board. The game ends when one player's blocks go over the end of the board, so really it's standard arcade puzzle fare. Landmaker's original arcade release was back in 1998. It's, to my knowledge, the final release on their F3 system of arcade hardware. Now this hardware was host to a wide variety of games, so it's hard to pin down a particular graphical style that you would associate with it. But even among all this wide variety, Landmaker's artwork is still somewhat unique. I can't recall Taito using anything like this before or after this game. And whether you think the character artwork is good or not, you can certainly agree that it is different. Now this isn't one of their more high-profile games, but to fans of Taito there are a few familiar names in the credits. In particular, one name stands out, and that's the lead music credit, Yasuhisa Watanabe. If you don't know his name, you've almost certainly heard some of his work. As one of the key members of Zuntata, Taito's sound team and house band, he's either composed music for or performed for an array of Taito games, as well as in their live performances. In recent years, since leaving Zuntata, he's been involved in a lot of arranged soundtracks for games like Death Smiles, Senko no Ronde, Mushihime-sama and Dodonpachi Daioju, to name a few. There's also a couple of Puzzle Bobble staff members on the credits as well. As a little aside, there's an even less familiar name in the credits, whose work you would have also recognised. The female voices in the game were provided by somebody called Lyle Wilkerson, who these days is better known for providing the voices for Nina Williams and Christy Monteiro in the Tekken series, as well as Sarah Bryant in Virtua Fighter 5, several characters from Shenmue 2, Gina from Crazy Taxi, and one of the characters from Rumble Roses. This PlayStation release came out around 2000. I got it shortly afterwards. I bought it around about the time I started getting into arcade emulation, which is just long enough ago to make me feel quite old. I mean, at the time, I was using the Rain emulator because it was much faster than MAME. And one of the areas that they focused on was Taito hardware. So I was really becoming aware of how awesome they were as a company and how many of their games I'd actually enjoyed over the years without realising it. Games like Bubble Bobble, Rainbow Islands, Parasol Stars, New Zealand Story, Chase HQ, Continental Circus, Rastan, and probably a couple of others. So after all this, I was really keen to get my hands on as much of their stuff as possible. So when I saw Landmaker on sale, I jumped at the chance to get it. It's about this time in the video where I've started to run out of things to say. Narrating puzzle games is actually quite difficult because you do the same things over and over again, which means it's very hard to stay interesting while talking about them. So to pass the time until something better happens, I thought I'd read you a passage from The Great Gatsby. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once there, they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby, and after that they conducted themselves according to the rules of behaviour associated with an amusement park. Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all. Came for the party with the simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. I had actually been invited. A chauffeur in a uniform of robin's egg blue crossed my lawn early that Saturday morning with a surprisingly formal note from his employer. The honour would be entirely Gatsby's, it said. We're going to skip forward now towards the end of arcade mode. This is the 8th opponent. There's 8 regular opponents in total, and then 2 bosses. Getting here on the PlayStation version isn't very difficult, actually. It's a lot easier to me than the arcade. Whether that's because the PlayStation version is easier, or because I'm playing the PAL version, which may or may not be slightly slower, I don't know for certain. All I can say is that getting this far on the arcade is a much bigger achievement than it is on the home versions. I got quite a good start on this level. I managed to get in a platinum structure, the biggest one you can get in the game, right at the start of the level. So most of this stage was just me biding my time until the computer character ran out of space. Usually I'm not always that lucky. I just got a good arrangement of blocks at the start of the level, which makes making the larger structures easier. Now once you've made your way through all 8 regular opponents in the game, and gone all the way around the island, the 9th character will appear. This is the first of the 2 boss fights. I'll tell you up front that I lost this encounter with the first boss, which isn't unusual. I've done this game on 1 credit a couple of times, but generally it's the bosses that beat me. So we're going to skip through this to the boss fight that I actually won, and then skip again to the second boss fight that I won. I think it took about 3 credits to finish this playthrough. And again, because this is a puzzle game, and I'm quite new to narrating video games, I don't have anything interesting to say, so I'm just going to leave those 2 uncommented for you to watch, and then I'll join you again afterwards. So there we go, that's the end of arcade mode. Now, after defeating the second boss, you get an ending sequence for every character, which seems a bit unusual because there's no reference to any kind of story or background to this game. There's no character bios or backgrounds in the attract mode, or the character select screen, or the manual, or anywhere. and yet you're given these endings that suggest that the game had something behind it all the time. So anyway, let's skip now to a quick look at puzzle mode and see how it uses the same mechanics but in a completely different way. Puzzle mode takes the basic mechanics of arcade mode and gives it a sort of a real estate twist. You get a series of areas with their own different colour schemes and environmental themes, and you have to develop a city around them. Each area is made up of a series of stages, and your progress is charted through this screen here, where you can see right now we have an empty board with just one house on it. After each stage, you begin to see more and more buildings develop, and hopefully by the end of the area, you've filled the entire board up. Now you can see here that puzzle mode has a completely different graphical style to arcade mode, but it still uses the same basic mechanics and controls. The aim here is to make buildings of a set size or above before you can progress. So this is the first level here where I need to build a 3x3 structure. So I need to do this before my blocks run off the edge of the board. And there we go, I've already completed the level. But because this is quite an easy stage, I've decided to make something a little bit bigger, get myself a few more points out of it. As the levels get harder and harder, it becomes more difficult to progress past the initial level clearance requirements. So by the end of it, I managed to go 2 sizes larger than the requirement. Now obviously, as the game goes on, it becomes more difficult. Although the difficulty ramps up very slowly, you get introduced to more challenges, more block colours start to appear, things require a bit more thought than they did at the start of the game. It's overall, it's a very long and drawn out experience as playing puzzle mode, but it is quite a relaxing game to play as well. It's very chilled, very sort of contemplative. It's not as hectic as arcade mode, although it's not a very interesting game to watch. I'll tell you that much anyway. So that's why we're not going to see much of puzzle mode here. I just thought I'd show you some of it to see how different it is and show the other side of the game. To be honest, I don't really play puzzle mode that much myself now. It used to be that I played puzzle mode a lot more than arcade, but gradually over the years that's kind of reversed and I almost play nothing but arcade mode now. I think although puzzle mode, it is a nice relaxing game, it is very, very long. And of course, there's not much variety to it, to be honest. The puzzles do get a little bit tiresome after a while. Whereas arcade mode, although it isn't relaxing at all, it's quite a frantic game, it's much more focused and a lot less meandering. And I think overall that makes it, for me, a much more satisfying game to play. And with that, I think we'll call it quits for this episode. Thank you for watching, and for those of you interested, my collected audiobook of the works of F. Scott Fitzgerald will be available from Time Life over the next few months.